Hello everyone and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, where you join me once again on Muluna, where there have been some mod updates which have broken everything, and so we've gone in and we've made some fixes. The first thing that changed, well, you can't actually see that one at the moment because all of the greenhouses that were around here growing up trees for us to make our wood supply have all been removed to be reused elsewhere. But basically, instead of greenhouses giving out wood or trees, and you select which one you want, and we wanted wood over here because we're then crushing that down to process it and yada yada yada. Instead, now they just produce trees, which you can still use if you want to make more greenhouses for growing trees. However, if you want the wood, you have to first crush the trees in order to get the wood out of them, and then you can carry on using them. So that required an extra step in there. Then getting the petroleum gas out of the wood required an extra step as well. Now it now needs crushed alumina to be fed in as well, so that's an additional complication. So that would require some redesigning around here, and we could probably use this piece of belt here to bring in some additional crushed alumina on the side here, so we could have reused this, but we decided we didn't want to. And then finally, over here where we're making the Alice propellant out for the rockets, this now no longer takes crushed alumina but takes crushed aluminium, and that's different because of the spelling. And so this belt here of crushed alumina is no longer any use for keeping these machines running. We need to bring in a different resource entirely. Now that wouldn't be too difficult because we do have aluminium over here and we could crush it on site and so on. But Mike decided that he wanted things to be rebuilt bigger and better. And so we've gone from the old bus system here, which started at the bottom here, looped around these ore patches and then came back down over here. We've expanded that out a bit, and we've now got a new bus that's heading off into the wild blue yonder, or wild grey yonder, over in this direction across the planetoid. And building on this slightly larger scale has required us to put in a little bit of work on the resource front as well. So let's start off by taking a look at that. First up is carbonic asteroid chunk mining. We need these for getting carbon out for all kinds of things, which we'll look into as we go a little bit further in. But originally I set up a mine up here to pull a load of it up and then feed it down a belt here that went off to the old factory. And Safir has come in and he's upgraded it massively by coming along and putting in these big mining drills. And that means we can get twice as much resource out of the patch, and it gets dug up a bit more quickly, although not that that really matters when we just have a single belt coming out. I think he's probably upgraded this belt from red to blue as well, which means we've got more resource being pushed through here. As well as that, he's put in a second carbonic chunk mine over here, or technically perhaps this is a third one because we already had one over in our starter area. But once again, this is going in with the large drills, so even though it says 1 million here, we're actually going to get 2 million out of it, because the nice thing about the large drills is they have a resource drain of 50%. Oh, and in fact we've then got a plus 140% productivity as well, so I guess that means we're going to get out somewhere in the region of 4.8 million. We're going to get almost 5 times as much stuff coming out of this patch as before, and this is why we like the big mining drills and all the productivity bonuses so much. I put in a new oxide mine down here, again with the large mining drills, and that's pulling out oxide chunks, as you'd expect. And then I ran a belt down here into the main part of the base through here to go down to the crushing systems that have been installed at the bottom. That's working nicely, and Safir has expanded off it, but we'll come back to that in a moment, because that's going to be relevant in a later part of the video. Finally, Tristan has added in an additional anorthite chunk mine over here, once again big mining drills, to go along with the one over here that's still using small mining drills. Maybe this could do with an upgrade as well. But that means we'll have lots and lots coming out here to make the aluminium from, and we're not actually going to get that much out of here, so maybe it doesn't matter too much about upgrading it. We can just go over to this one, which is about 2 million, which means we're going to be getting close to 10 million out of this patch, which is amazing. You may have noticed, if you're familiar with Muluna, that we haven't really expanded the metallic asteroid chunk mining. We've still got this little patch over here where we're digging it up with the basic mining drills and feeding it out on the belt, and we haven't actually needed any more. We don't seem to get through particularly large amounts of iron, so it's been quite happy. We haven't been too worried about that one. I suspect at some point, for the sake of completeness, we'll probably go out and tap another patch. Like these two down here, they're quite nice. There's 4 million down here between the two. So this would be a good one to go off to when we need a bit more. But for the time being, it's the oxide asteroid chunks and the carbonic asteroid chunks that we're ripping through at the highest rate. And so those are the ones that we've concentrated on first. And the anorthite, just because this is a fairly small patch, and it's nice to have a bit more because it is still also fairly important. One thing you might have noticed is that we're doing all of this with belts. We're bringing all of these chunks in by belt to the main part of the factory rather than using trains. And part of the reason for that is, to be honest, it's not actually that far. So running a belt from here over to here isn't that big a deal. It's not that far. But mostly it's because these chunks only stack up to 1. And so that means if you start putting them in trains, you can only fit 40 in each wagon, and that's really quite inefficient. Trains are great when you can put massive quantities of stuff in them and then shoot them across the landscape. But when you've got a factory like this, where there's sort of carbonic is up here and anorthite down here, and you don't have lots of things trying to travel down the same sort of general area, it's actually easier and probably cheaper to run belts like this rather than to try and run trains along, especially when you consider that the trains are then going to run into that capacity issue due to the stuff not stacking very well in them. So actually this is going to be a really good way of providing the resources, and I think in this particular instance belts are the correct answer, and trains would sadly be a little bit foolish. Mike has actually put this into numbers. A red belt is 30 items per second, and a train is 40 items per wagon. So you'd need about a wagon coming in every second in order to beat the throughput of a red belt, and that's just not realistic. I don't think we could have trains travelling that quickly back and forth between the patches. And so yeah, we are going to be much better off with belts in this particular instance. The other possibility, of course, would be to crush on site and then transport the products of the crushing in the trains, because they pack it in a lot more densely. But that would require more infrastructure and more faff to deal with all the byproducts, and it wouldn't actually help that much, because each asteroid chunk crushes into around 20 to 40 items once you take all of the productivity bonuses into account. These chunks are big, no wonder they don't stack. And speaking of breaking these things into multiple chunks, that brings us nicely onto the crushing systems over here that Mark has upgraded. When we came back to this planet, we had simple basic electric crushers all the way across here, and that required huge areas of them, so this entire area was basically full of crushers and belts. But now, because these ones are much faster, running at a speed of 2.5 instead of a speed of 1, and having an inherent productivity bonus of plus 50%, we don't need anything like as much crushers to get out all of the resources we need. That bonus of 50% on the resource output is also part of the reason why we don't need to worry too much about going out and expanding all of our mines at this stage, because we're not getting through that much stuff. On top of the productivity bonus we're getting from these crushers, the iron ore is then passed up to another set of crushers built by Tristan, which are turning it into crushed iron ore, in this case with an 80% productivity bonus, because you've got the 50% from the crusher itself, and then another 30% because we've researched iron crushing productivity or something. So we're getting a huge amount out there, and then we're getting that little bit of the way where the iron ore gets passed round like these pieces, so it gets reused, and you get even more out. So we're getting some crazy amount of productivity bonus here. And then that's being passed off to the smelting systems over here, where Tristan's put in an extra row of machines down here to cook us up some more iron, because apparently we needed that at one point. Probably because all of this is going into the steel, and then actually the steel is catching up now. That's going quite well, because this was struggling beforehand. Similarly with the aluminium, I copied this strip from here and put it in over here to give us a bit more aluminium throughput, which at the moment actually seems a little bit overkill, but at the time I put it in we were very short of aluminium, and I reckoned we needed it. You may have noticed at this point that along here we're using electric furnaces for all of our cooking around here, and that might seem a little bit odd to you when I've been extolling the virtues of some of the amazing machines we get from Vulcanus, like the large crushers. We've also got the foundries. But not using foundries here has been very much a deliberate decision, because if you want to cook your iron in a foundry, you need to first turn it into molten iron, and that requires calcite, and we don't have any calcite on this planet, and so we reckoned that the additional logistics cost and effort of bringing the calcite over from Vulcanus to Muluna was not worth it just to get that extra bit of productivity. And I say just that little extra bit, there's quite a lot of productivity available in there, because you do get the 50% productivity boost from the foundry for turning the crushed iron ore into molten, and then you get a second 50% boost from turning it into the iron plates, or potentially into the pipes or low density structures, or whatever else you need to make at this point. You then get an additional 50% bonus there, so you are going to be getting more than twice the amount out, so you do get a big bonus. However, we seem to have a decent amount of resources on this planet, so we're not too worried about that at the moment. We may revisit this later, but for now we've decided it's not worth trying to bring the calcite in and do these big upgrades here, at least just yet. Maybe that'll be a project for the future. Tristan has then done a little bit of expansion and checking over on the in the mall area. So we've got a robo mall here, bringing in all the bits and pieces that are required from chests scattered around wherever resources are being made. It's a little bit hard to tell with a robo mall, but lots of things being made here. Specifically and most excitingly, Tristan has now added in making the cliff explosives, and that requires us to make grenades and barrels. And that does actually require us to have some calcite on this planet. So actually, we do have calcite here, and maybe we should be feeding it into foundries. maybe that's something we should look into and have a good think about, because if we've already got calcite being brought here, then there's such a good bonus from cooking these things in foundries that it feels slightly silly not to. So that's another thing to consider for a future session. He says he's also gone through and checked all the resources being brought in here and made sure everything is running correctly and that everything is happy. And then with all these resources, Mark has then come in and done all this sort of the spaghetti and the belt network required to get a new bus running and coming out along here. So we've got all the resources we could possibly want, like glasses, iron ore being brought along here, as well as iron plates. Then we've got carbon and ice, and that's probably sand and stone, and so on and so on. We've got lots and lots of different things being pumped along the bus over here, so we can make sure we have all the resources we need for the next steps. And that brings us nicely on to the next major expansion and the big thing that we wanted to be building off the bus over here, and that is plastic. So as you can see here, we've got a rank of machines making plastic, that's being chucked out, and it's going away on a belt down here. And Mike asked Safir to make a blue belt of plastic, because that seemed like a nice amount to have. And then Safir started doing the maths and said, are you sure that's going to require quite a lot of machines? And Mike said, nah, just go for it. What's the worst that could happen? So yeah, so we have a blue belt of plastic available out on Muluna. And let's take a look at how that goes together. Making plastic on Muluna using the Mulunian recipe requires cellulose and petroleum gas. Okay, that sounds reasonable. So let's have a look at the cellulose first. That's coming in on a couple of belts here, one to go to each bank of machines. Fine, if we follow that back, it comes along here as a balancer, very nice, always useful. And then that comes up along into here, and we can see that that's being made out of wood and sulfuric acid. Okay, so we're expanding our tree of required things backwards a little bit here, but these don't sound like particularly difficult things. So let's go down here. Okay, so we've got a crusher here that is taking in trees and crushing them down into wood. Fine, that's giving us that supply of wood, so we can dissolve it to get the cellulose out of it. And those trees are then coming along a belt, and they're coming from, okay, that's quite a lot of greenhouses. Yes, we have quite a lot of greenhouses along here to make all of the trees that are needed to make all the wood, to make all of the cellulose, to make all of the plastic. And along here, Safir has taken Mike's modular design, where you have a vacuum boiler here that is taking in carbon and then burning that in the presence of oxygen in order to make carbon dioxide, and then pumping that out into the greenhouse, which then grows the trees, as greenhouses do, and that produces trees and then releases a load of oxygen that goes into this tank here. So in theory, the oxygen goes round and round in the loop, and you bring in a supply of carbon and a supply of water, and that gets taken away in the form of trees, which is pretty much how trees work, so I'm happy with this design. The only problem with this is that unfortunately Mike designed these to have slight gaps between them so they don't they don't work together. But unfortunately Safir didn't realise this when he was dropping them in, and so as you can see here, we've got the oxygen being passed straight through from this greenhouse into this one, and the carbon dioxide being passed straight through, and that's upset some of the ratios a little bit, so things have gone a little bit funny. However, it is working well enough that this isn't a particularly serious problem, but it just means that you could end up in a case where if you don't have enough oxygen for the system, you could end up with the carbon dioxide being sort of spread across lots and lots of different greenhouses rather than being kept in specifically for one of them, and then the system might not work. And so there are a few areas where they're not working quite as well as they should do. However, that does just mean we need to pump a bit more oxygen into the system, and then it should start working. So what we would ideally do is if we ever have a shortage of trees, we'll come back here and we'll have a look to see which machines are not working. And Mike has designed quite an elegant system here where if you want to put a bit more oxygen into a system, it's a bit like blowing extra air into a tyre. We just can rotate this tank here, it hooks up to this pipe here, and then we can fill the tank up, there we go, 19,000, and flip it back round again. And then there's a load more extra oxygen to be put into this vacuum boiler to be cooked into carbon dioxide that can then be put into this tank here. Of course, then that will then dribble up and go into all of the rest of the machines through here. So you kind of need to make sure that you keep track of just how much there is in total in the systems and make sure that it's going to work nicely. Which is slightly more awkward than the original design, where you would just flip one of these round, wait until it's full, and then flip it round again to turn it into carbon dioxide, and that would bootstrap the system very, very nicely. So once again, you can see this has run out, so I could rotate this round, get another 18,000, but back again, and then it's given it another kick, it get a little bit more oxygen into the system. So we can keep topping it up as and when necessary until we've got all of the greenhouses able to work, but it's not quite as neat as it would have been if there'd been little gaps and each one was its own self-contained system. The question is, how should we fix this? There are a couple of options. One is to go through and demolish every other row of systems, but that would waste a lot of space, a lot of gases. It would just be it would look a bit messy afterwards. We could start at the top and just sort of shuffle them along a little bit to create a little bit more space, and then we'd have to move that and that and that, and there's a pipe in the way, and that. You see, you can see how much of a faff it would be to fix all of these individually like this. But you could go in and you could sort them all out like that and move everything up sort of one item at a time. Or you could just go, you know what, I don't care. The system basically works. We just need to occasionally rotate a tank to make sure we've got a suitable amount of all the gases we need, and then not worry about it. These are all options, and we may, I suspect we'll just go with the, I don't care, it's working well enough, at least until it doesn't work well enough, and then we can come in and do some fixes. So this system, working our way continuously back up the tree, pun entirely unintended for once, this requires a steady supply of water and carbon. So where do those come from? Well, that comes from the new crushing areas that I was telling you not to worry about earlier, that Safir has made over here. So that's splitting off the oxide chunks from this mine over here to bring them up to here, and then we're crushing those oxide chunks into ice, and some of those fail to crush properly and they're being passed around here to go in again, and you've got the standard priorities, exactly as you've seen before. Also produces some sand, which is being sent off to be turned into glass as required, or alternatively, if we've got too much of it, then we're using the weird system on Muluna, where if you drop things on the floor, they just disappear somehow, they just get buried. This is almost as if you're in space. So this is a way of getting rid of any excesses that are coming through and just making sure that we don't have too much of anything. Interestingly, on Muluna, you can kind of do the opposite as well. You can put a drill in a place where there aren't actually any resources there, and the drill will start to dig up the lunar regolith, which comes out as well. 25% chance of the regolith and a 1% chance of crushed stone coming out. The regolith can then be crushed into stone, crushed stone and uranium ore to get some vaguely useful stuff out there. And we are using nuclear power on this planetoid, so the uranium ore would be useful. And we're using stone for various things, mostly making glass, I think, at the moment. The crushed stone can then be turned into bricks or into landfill, so potentially we could then start making bricks and landfill on this planet from the crushed stone. These are options. I don't think any of these are particularly useful, so this is not a feature of the game or of the planet. This is not a feature of the planet we've actually started using yet. But it's interesting to know that it's there. Where was I? Oh yes, and that produces a large quantity of ice that can be then passed down the belts along here and then brought over here to where we're melting enormous quantities of ice down into water, and that's all being sent over into the tree growing and anywhere else that needs it. So that's working really nicely. Similarly, we have a supply of carbonic asteroid chunks coming in here, and they're being brought over from this split in this belt that's coming down from the two mines that we talked about earlier. So they're coming over here, and once again Safir is crushing them down, and again he's got the sort of the loops of the recycling and the loop taking away the coal, which is sort of a byproduct, and the big belts taking away massive quantities of carbon to be made into carbon dioxide to be made into trees. One thing that's notable about all of these crushing facilities that he's put in is that he's doing the sorting almost immediately, and this ensures that you have full belts coming out over here, and you don't have any sort of silly things with gaps of where there was a piece of sand coming along here that then got sorted out. Because we've got so many crushers along here, you will always manage to get a solid belt of ice coming out here, and then another one here, and the same with the carbon. So we get lots and lots of output, even if there's some byproducts coming through as well. So we're getting to the end of this particular branch of the tree. But there's a couple of other notes, and one is that you're going to need the oxygen to kickstart this system, and that has to come from somewhere. The oxygen may go round and round in a loop and not be consumed, but you still need to provide a little bit to bootstrap the system. And that is coming from over here, where previously, before the mod update, we were able to just electrolyse water and create hydrogen and oxygen. We can blow the hydrogen off out into the lack of atmosphere, and then keep the oxygen, and then put that in for making the trees. However, that recipe no longer exists since the mod update, and so now we have to do the recipe where you take in the thruster oxidizer and turn that into oxygen and water. And to make the thruster oxidizer, you need iron ore and water. So I guess technically the water goes round and round, fine, but it means we're somehow turning iron ore into oxygen. I suppose technically the iron ore is probably mostly rust, and therefore there is some oxygen in it, but that does make me wonder where the rest of the iron is going. But let's not worry about that too much, because, it's only a game. But anyway, so we've got that supply of iron ore coming in from the crushing down here that we talked about earlier. That's brought up over here and is then turned into functionally into the oxygen that we need for the rest of the system. We do have a buffer tank here to ensure that we never have too much oxygen, and that's keeping this pipe here full and allowing some space over here for any oxygen that's produced from these greenhouses, and then we're topping it up with a pump here whenever we have a bit of a shortage. So there should always be plenty of oxygen available on the system, and we can use that here for kickstarting the tree growing and anywhere else that we might need oxygen further down the stream as well. Similarly, we've got a backup carbon dioxide production system here. So that's producing, again, some carbon dioxide by burning the carbon in the oxygen atmosphere. And again, we're topping up a little tank over here, and then that can be pushed out down the bus in case we ever need any carbon dioxide anywhere else. And it turns out that we do, and you'll find out more about that in the next video. So it's a good thing that we have this system in here to provide an overflow of carbon dioxide, because in theory, this system never provides any extra. There is one other thing that's very important for making trees, and that's the seeds. And those are nice and easy. The recipe there hasn't changed. You still just take in the wood, and you can then process that. You can make seeds, and those can be passed back through to go into the greenhouses and make more and more and more trees. It does occur to me that perhaps for the sake of logic, it shouldn't be the wood that you take in, it should be the trees you take in to extract the seeds from, but again, I'm not going to worry about that. The system is working, I don't want to break things. And this is probably going to be easier to bootstrap if you ever run out of trees or ever have any sort of problems, so it probably makes sense there from a balance point of view. And so that's plastic, just like that. Oh, wait a minute, no it isn't, because that covers the cellulose, great, but we still need petroleum gas in order to make the plastic. Okay then, well, we've got back to the root of the tree, now let's go out and find another branch to explore. So, making the petroleum gas, well, it's also being used to make sulfur, which is being used to make sulfuric acid, so that's another convenient reason why we need petroleum gas, because we need that sulfuric acid in order to make the cellulose, so this is a bit of a loop of a recipe, but we did manage to get it kick-started, so it can't have been that hard. Maybe. So yes, that petroleum gas comes, well, that also comes from cellulose. So we have the wood gasification, where you bring in crushed alumina and cellulose and water, and you've seen where the water comes from. And from that, we get 90% of the crushed alumina back, so that's a feed it back out round another belt here and then feed it in as a priority input. Okay, well, that's important, but it's a solved problem. We've done that sort of thing before. And then much like crude oil processing, you also then get out heavy oil, light oil, and petroleum gas. So there we go, that's great. We can use the petroleum gas over here to make the plastic. But we've got the byproducts of the light oil and the heavy oil, but that's very, very familiar. We know what to do with those. We bring them over to these tanks, and then we use the cracking recipes to turn the light oil into petroleum gas and the heavy oil into light oil and into petroleum gas. So we've got a decent amount of petroleum gas coming out here. We can make sure we've always got plenty of that available. And yeah, look at that, this pipe is completely full. Excellent. And as a side note, if we've got some heavy oil, that means we can also turn that into lube, which means if we need to, we can start making blue belts on this planet without needing to bring in any other resources, because we've got all of the iron we need coming out of the metallic asteroid chunks, and now we've got lube coming from wood as well, so yeah, that works nicely. And so that took Safir quite a while to build, because there was a lot of maths working out just how much of stuff he was going to need. And then after that, there was quite a lot of building. It took about a stream and a half to get all of this built up, and a lot of that was waiting for us to have enough of the greenhouses, but then also quite a lot of it was waiting for the bots to just build the whole thing, because it's massive. But it all came together very nicely and started producing that plastic. There is, however, one other thing that I've not touched on yet. And that is the coal that's being produced as a byproduct of this crushing process over here. And you can see that's being taken away merrily down here. And you can use coal to go into your burning systems over here to make your carbon dioxide and make your trees. And that's what we were doing initially with the old system, because it was it burns just as well as carbon does. There's no real reason to use one or the other. They're both perfectly good fuels. However, there is a much better use for coal on this planet, and that's something that Mark has now put in up here. We're bringing all of that coal in, we're crushing it down, and then we're using coal liquefaction. And that means we've got another method for making the heavy oil, the light oil, and the petroleum gas. And then we can crack those down as before in exactly the same way. And that's good because it puts a little bit less strain on the wood growing system. It provides us with an alternative recipe for producing all of these oil products. And so that means we've got even more petroleum gas available to pump into all of the things over here, like the plastic and the sulfur, in order to keep the system running. So I think that's a very nice way of using up a bit of something we have too much of in order to put a bit less load on something we don't actually want. Once again, I see Mark is using the dump things into the ground so they disappear system for getting rid of the excess stone that comes out of here, which is fair enough because it'd be rather a lot of spaghetti to try and take that off somewhere a bit more useful. One thing that's been a little bit amusing in a kind of schadenfreude kind of way, and I'm sure Mark won't mind me bringing this up, is that, well, in order to do the coal liquefaction, you do require steam. You have to pump that in order to get everything excited, I suppose, and get the oils out of the powdered coal. And so he went going, how on earth do we make steam on Muluna? How can we do that? Because we can't use a boiler because that requires air. But we can use a vacuum boiler, which, as the name implies, works in a vacuum. So that takes in water and oxygen and crushed coal to use as a fuel and produces steam and carbon dioxide. Fair enough. You're boiling the water by burning the coal. Fine, that works very, very nicely. And so that means we can then pump the carbon dioxide out as a byproduct, and that's then going into the same carbon dioxide system we saw before to be used wherever it's it's needed, which is fine. That works very, very nicely. But also means you need to bring in the oxygen as well. And this all works very nicely. There's no sort of no problems with it, except he completely forgot that we have a nice healthy supply of steam coming from our nuclear power plant down here, and so we could just tap off a seam of it, take it along here, and bring it onto the bus to use it wherever we need it. But, you know, it's not that bad. Over here, the oxygen and the carbon dioxide were fairly nearby, so it hasn't been too difficult to get them plumbed in. And it's working very, very well. It's producing the resources we need, and is giving us that extra bit of carbon dioxide that is quite useful in a few places that we'll look at in the next video. And if we ever have too much carbon dioxide coming out of there, that's why these greenhouses are here. So all that carbon dioxide comes in along this pipe and gets put into this tank, and can then also be pushed out down this pipe down here to go off into the rest of the factory for wherever it's needed. And then any spare from there, Safir is pushing into these greenhouses to use it up, which will make trees which will be used as a priority. But if we have too many of them, they can always just be thrown away by dropping them onto the Muluna surface and having them just vanish as if by magic. And so, what do you do with a blue belt of plastic? Well, that gets taken out onto the bus and is used for other things further down the factory. And the first thing was a bit I dropped in over here, where we've got green circuits to make red circuits to make blue circuits, and also green circuits to make blue circuits, and then also green circuits to make red circuits. And I quite like this sort of system, because it means you're sure you have enough green circuits coming through to make your red circuits, even when your blue circuit production then suddenly starts using enormous amounts of green circuits. I might have gone a little bit overboard here with the number of green circuits being produced. And then over here, you've got enough red circuits being produced to keep your bus happy, and then enough green circuits to keep that happy, without once again pulling from all of the other systems. So it keeps each of them sort of separate, and that means it takes up a bit more space than doing them all separately, sure, but having each one with its own private feed means you don't have to worry about the feeds getting split and running out of things in awkward places. And this was really, really easy to put in because it's just a straight copy and paste of the previous system I built over here, where we had the same green circuits to make red circuits to make blue circuits, and also green circuits to make blue circuits and green circuits to make red circuits. And we had a nice healthy supply of all of those available, of which we weren't using all that many, but we had them available just in case. And then we're feeding those into here to make various different module types, because we're probably going to need some of these at some point. We can get tier 1 and tier 2 with just the 3 types of circuits, so that's nice and easy. We haven't bothered bringing in the extra resources to make tier 3 modules of things, because that's a bit more complicated and requires a lot more logistics, and to be honest, it's a lot easier just to bring in the modules. But for places where we just need a little bit of a nudge to speed or efficiency or whatever, then these modules are perfectly good, so we're quite happy to use those. Continuing with the copy-paste theme, well, I've taken the system from over here, which was pretty much fine, really. The only problem was that we had a different input coming in here for the Alice rocket fuel production, and that's easy enough to fix because you just put a different thing onto the belt. So I thought, well, fine, I'll copy that, I'll bring that from over here, flip it round and mirror it, and then drop it in here. So once again, we've got the system that's bringing in the steel and the plastic and the aluminium to make the low density structures. Fine, we've got loads of those coming out along here. Then we're bringing in ice and then there was a crushed aluminium. We'll get back to that in a moment, and water, which we're melting on site here from bringing in ice. And Safir has asked why we're doing this, why I decided this was the right way to do it, bringing in the ice. And my answer was basically it was because that's how I did it before, and I just did a copy paste. But he's got that massive ice melting facility over here, which is producing huge amounts of water. So I could have just tapped the water off this pipe that's running all the way along the bus. I didn't, but I could have done, and that would probably have been slightly more space efficient. It would have been probably slightly better. And there's another advantage that I'll talk about in a second. So I could have melted the ice there. And then there's a crushed aluminium, and well, I decided it wasn't worth putting crushed aluminium on the belt because there is literally one thing that uses it, and that is this rocket fuel from Alice. And so we're bringing in aluminium here. I've got some crushers on site, which I'm going to smash that down, put it onto the belt as crushed aluminium, pump it up into here, and there, boom, we've got the rocket fuel coming out. Lovely, just what we need. And then we've got the space science being produced, and that's a nice simple recipe. It's exactly the same as we saw before. We're bringing in ice and glass, carbon and iron, and all of these things come from the asteroid chunks with very, very little processing. The ice comes out of crushed oxide chunks, the glass comes out of crushed oxide chunks as well, because you get a bit of sand as a byproduct, which you can cook into glass, and if you don't have enough from that, then you can also take the stone that comes out from the metallic crushing and crush that into sand and cook that into glass. And if you still don't have enough, then I guess you mine up some lunar regolith and take the stone from that and crush that and make glass from that. So there are many, many ways to get your glass. Carbon comes straight out of crushing carbonic asteroids, and iron comes from crushing the metallic asteroids and then cooking the iron ore into iron plates with or without crushing in the middle if you want. So all these come basically straight from the asteroid chunk crushing. That's really, really easy. And those get made into the space science packs we can drop onto this belt and pass off for dealing with later. Mike has accused me of building this a bit too small and is saying we won't be able to fit the science enrichment machines in here if we want to in the future. And my answer for that was going to be, oh yeah, you're probably right, I just did a copy-paste from before we knew about the science enrichment machine, so I guess we'll have to do a bit of rebuilding. However, having thought about that a little bit further, I think he's wrong. Because I think we're going to be able to drop them in here and it'll be absolutely fine. There is enough room between the machines making the science and the machines crushing the aluminium that we'd then be able to run the science output belt in there, the enhancer machine in there, and the magic fluid running along an underground pipe along here, still giving room for us to put in the inserters there to get the science packs out. So I think that will still fit in, that would be absolutely fine. And if it turns out we do need more space than that, then we could always remove these ice melting machines here and bring the water in off the bus like he told me I should be doing. So there's a good amount of room around here. We will be able to fit in whatever we need to do. Possibly even including unbarreling the magic fluid in this space over here, because I think that just takes an assembly machine. There's plenty of room for that. And then we'd be in a really convenient place for then passing the empty barrels back round to the spaceport here in order to take them back to Igris for refilling. Whether we do end up actually using a science enhancement machines over here on this planet remains to be seen, because to be honest, making the space science is actually a very, very easy and cheap recipe, especially compared to everything else that's going on this moon, that I feel like the amount of resource going into this is insignificant enough that we could just carry on making it this way, at least for the foreseeable future. But you know what, we'll see how things go, but I think this is going to be one of the low priority science packs for upgrading like that. This brings us on to the spaceport that Tristan's put in over here, so we've got a couple of silos down here for spoiler related reasons. We'll talk about those in the next video. Then we've got another two here that are bringing in the space science packs. We've filled up a couple of boxes here to a rocket's worth each. So that means now we've built 2 rockets in the silo, we can have the spaceship arrive, we can launch 4 rockets up in very, very quick succession using what's stockpiled in here and the 2 rocket silos. And so we can take 4,000 science packs away with very little time required. And because Muluna is so close to Norvis, the spacecraft flies back and forth very, very quickly. So even if we're not loading it up to as many as we need to, the transit time is so low that it can come back and get some more without it being a serious problem. He's also got an additional 2 rocket silos up here for anything else that we might need to rocket away from this planet. And I mentioned potentially bringing in the Igrian magic fluid over here. That's certainly a possibility. There are other possibilities as well, such as maybe making spaceships in orbit over this planet, because it's cheaper to launch stuff from here. We have half-price rockets because we can use the microgravity rocket parts because it's a tiny, tiny moon. And we have the facilities to make lots of the spaceship parts over here as well. So Mike started doing that over here initially before we did the mod update. So we're making, for example, the initial starter pack for a rocket silo. We're making spaceship flooring and thrusters and grabbers and then there's the storage boxes as well. So we could ship all of these up in rockets relatively easily. And we had problems with that previously because we would have a glass or a sand overflow. But now that the mod update has allowed us to just chuck stuff on the floor to dispose of it, if we have any excesses, we can get rid of them like that. So Mike's dream of building spaceships in orbit over Muluna could well still come to fruition. And it makes a certain amount of sense because you can launch up lots of the things that are required en masse, like spaceship flooring, from here, then build up the absolute basics, like there'll be a few extra little bits like thrusters and grabbers and maybe a couple of chemical plants, just so you can get a little bit of fuel into the spaceship, and then fly it over to Norvis, where we do have massive amounts of rocket launch capacity, but it's relatively expensive. But then also, more importantly, we then have all of the bits and pieces that you could require to properly fit out your spaceship, ready to send it off to wherever it needs to go. And the other bonus is that this whole area, the whole Norvian sphere of influence, which covers Muluna orbit, Lignumis orbit, Norvis orbit, and the areas between them, doesn't contain any dangerous asteroids, so you can fly back and forth in this area as much as you like, and you don't risk damaging your spaceship, even if you haven't been able to build any gun turrets to go on the front of it yet. So there's definitely potential to do some building of spaceships in this sort of area, but in a sort of tag team between Muluna and Norvis. So we'll see how that goes. And so that's a lot of what we've been doing on Muluna. There's been a big push to get the wood and the plastic up and running, and then we've quickly come in and got the science packs that we had before up and running. You might have noticed that there's a little bit more on the bus beyond where we've been looking. And yes, there is another science pack being made in this area, but there were some weird technicalities and some fun puzzles in there that I think deserve a video of their own. So we'll be looking at those in the next one. So please make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss that. It's a really interesting mechanic that I'm very impressed with, so I'm looking forward to showing you all about how that works. So make sure you don't miss out on that one. And these videos come out every Thursday and Friday, so you might not have too long to wait. We shall see. If you fancy giving Planetary Pioneers a try yourself, then the mod is available through the Factorio mod portal. Just download it. It'll install all of the mods that we're using, and then you can go and mess around with the quality of life mods and that sort of thing if you want to do things slightly differently. You'll get all of the planets, all the research packs, all of that stuff included from the start. We'll be back to play some more Planetary Pioneers on Monday at 7:30 PM UK time, so check that out on YouTube or Twitch, where we'll be off on yet another new planet and poking at things and seeing what happens. I will also be streaming Foundry on Wednesday. That's a sort of Factorio in a Minecraft world. So there's all kinds of 3D cube stuff to play around with, which has been a lot of fun, and I feel like I'm getting fairly close to the end of the game now, but they are teasing new features, so maybe I'll have some more things to play with quite soon. And that's another great one to come along to. So yeah, please come along and check that one out on Wednesday. And I think that's about all I have for you. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.